Okay, well, hopefully you've all had a chance to complete the survey. If not, please make some time and get those surveys done. So slight change of mode of presentation this morning where I'm going to run through the lecture slide by slide this time around. And our topic for the lecture this morning is composing images, or composing in brackets with images, looking at video and graphics in Macs with Jitter. So I want to introduce you to the idea of music as an audiovisual art form, and our general topic for the subject is composing with sound. And this sort of implies that we can compose, an artist or an illustrator uses the term composition to describe the process that they engage in when they're creating an image. And we might think about the audiovisual image as a composite image. So I want to get that idea across. And also look at the practicalities of working with images, particularly video, in Macs, and that is the Jitter part of the program. So we're going to look at the Jitter Matrix, and I'll just touch on the idea of linking audio to controlling a Jitter Matrix. And the purpose, the goal of this lecture is to get you thinking about visual music, audiovisual media in general, and hopefully this will seed some ideas that might come to fruition later in the course or in your career. So the French film theorist and composer Michel Chion, who was a student of Pierre Schaeffer, who you might remember me mentioning last year, he attempted to describe what happens when sound is synchronized with an image in audiovisual media. So he was particularly interested in film, but he was also interested in the emerging practice of video art and film art, short films. He coined the term syncresis. So it kind of sounds a little bit like synchronization. And syncresis was meant to capture the idea that when you add sound to an image, often you get something that's more than the sum of the parts. And he used the example of the design of sound effects in film. So for example, I think he or other theorists have looked at images like the boxing film Rocky, where you get the image of the leather glove intersecting with the face of the boxer. And the sound that goes along with that is not the recording of a glove hitting a face. It's some fabricated sound effect, usually using some other type of material, but somehow the sound and the image works together, and it creates a real visceral sense of this display of physical violence. And there are many other examples of the synchronized combination of sound with image that creates a kind of effect in the viewer that's more than just a sound effect plus an image. And this really is one of the fundamental bases of audiovisual art. That is audiovisual art that is not based in narrative. So we're usually used to thinking of film and television as being narrative based. It's all about telling a story, but there is the potential for audiovisual art that has that tries to present audiovisual forms. So that's a concept to grapple with. We use the idea of musical form. What would audiovisual form be? So really, probably one of the most important starting points, we mentioned this in audio cultures, is the development of optical sound on film, or at least synchronized sound and film. And one of the interesting things that early pioneer researchers started thinking about was, with this variable width optical print. So that's what you can see on the left-hand side there. Those little white squiggles represent the amplitude of the audio signal varying in time. An optical sensor is used to convert those into an electrical signal, which is amplified and sent to a loudspeaker. Early people working in experimental film looked at this and they thought to themselves, well, why couldn't we actually draw or paint this image and thereby directly synthesize sound? And of course, animation is all about drawing images frame by frame. So very early on, there was this concept of linking these two ideas of drawing the sound and drawing the image. And Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was an artist and a designer who famously worked in the Bauhaus school in Germany in the 1930s, he wrote about this potential for a new audiovisual media. And really about the same time, there were a bunch of people working at developing this concept. So one of those people was a Canadian experimental filmmaker, a guy called Norman McLaren, and he developed a whole series of techniques. And I'm going to show you some material about his work. This first bit of video I'm going to show is a documentary, from an extract from a documentary about the work of Norman McLaren. And let's just see what this looks like. Hopefully you're going to get the audio and it's not going to be too loud. Just hold on and we'll see what happens. Oh, hang on. Let's press the right button.
You can even create your own sounds by drawing directly on the film. Norman McLaren, the motion picture artist, has been making some hand-drawn sounds, and now he's going to hear them for the first time, played on the moviola, a sort of miniature movie projector. It's not just guesswork. The sound of any of these patterns of lines can be calculated. The size controls the loudness. A row of small marks would sound like this. Larger marks, a louder sound. That's simple enough. Then there's the tone quality. It's controlled by the shape of the marks. This series of thin, straight lines gives a sharp, rather unpleasant sound. But these round dots are a bit smoother. The marks can be any shape you like. Now how about this? Using the brush, Norman tries a row of small triangles. These sharp, angular forms, what would they sound like? The distance the lines are apart controls pitch. With the lines far apart, a low-pitched note, a medium, and a high note. Now, what can they be used for, these hand-drawn sounds? Well, Norman McLaren finds that they are a perfectly natural accompaniment to some of his hand-drawn motion pictures. Each movement of the screen can have its own specially designed sound. Making movies this way, the artist has direct personal control at every stage of the film's production. Sound and picture are planned and closely related to each other as they are drawn. Now Norman is checking to make sure that each bit of sound is perfectly matched to its accompanying screen action. Finally, the picture and the sound will be printed together on one length of film, and color will be added during the process.
Okay, so some of those images, some of the final images in that film from the film Loops, and I'll just play you, how much of this will I play you? I'll play you the whole thing. Here it comes. So I think what you can see emerging in this work is the idea that pitch, timbre can be matched to the shape of, in this case, abstract shapes. But also we get things like texture. So in that final set of scenes there, where we get multiple objects on the screen, we get a sense of audiovisual texture arising. And we also get impact sounds. So, you know, two graphical objects intersect, and we get a sound that attaches to that interaction between the shapes. So, you know, this is, I think, you know, a good example of a kind of emerging idea of audiovisual form, you know, form in its broadest conception. So about the same time, and much more famously, is Walt Disney's Fantasia. So this is a kind of, I don't really know what to think about this. It's a sort of industrial approach to the creation of audiovisual art. It's built by teams of people. Famously, the conductor Stokowski conducted the Philadelphia Symphony to create the soundtrack, and this is the dawn of surround sound, so an early multi-microphone, multi-speaker sound system, and the animators tried to imagine how the musical material, in this case an extract from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite ballet music, might look visually. And I'll just play a little extract of that. So what you see emerging here is both fairly refined conception of phrasing, so audiovisual phrasing. We get these kind of gestural contours that are taken out of the music and represented in terms of images, but we also get the concept of characterization. And you can sort of see that in the McLaren example, even though it's quite abstract, the idea that each shape might have its own character. And of course, this is the 1940s, so we get this layer of cultural stereotypes superimposed over the top of that. Interesting, though, in terms of developing this idea of an audiovisual art form. So just one more example from Norman McLaren, which takes the idea of phrasing and form. So in this particular, this is just an extract from a larger film, which is called Canon, and it takes the idea of canon form, which in this case, we're going to hear a musical round, which is a form, which is an example of canon form, and tries to represent that idea of form on both a sonic and a visual level. So we already have the idea of form in motion from ballet. I mean, ballet is the art form traditionally that takes this concept of form in motion and realizes it with human bodies on stage. But in this work, we can see the idea of form in motion and audio visual form, really being worked out in a very fairly simple but rigorously resolved form. Okay, so another important historical touch point in the development of audiovisual art is what's sometimes referred to as Sony Lumiere, which is, I mean, it's got a French name because the French got very big on this idea, sound and light shows. People like Jean-Michel Jarre, had fantastic sound and light shows for musical performances. And the modernist composer Yanis Xenakis really took this conception to a fairly high degree with these works Polytope de Cluny, which he was an engineer and a composer, famously worked with Le Corbusier, the famous French architect. And he built these temporary structures and designed sound, light, and sound and light and a 3D structure that all went together. And some early use of laser lighting. So this is really just a collection of still images that are put together, images of the installation in Paris it was done several times between 1972 and 1974. Let's have a quick look at some of these images. interesting images there of the audience lying on their backs, very much early 70s form of presentation. So just coming back into the present, the Australian composer Robin Fox has kind of been revisiting a lot of these ideas. And he started working, maybe 15 years ago, perhaps, or 10 years ago at least, with a device called an oscilloscope, which is a piece of test equipment that's used to display, make a visual display of electrical signals. And he started building max patches and using the audio output of the max patch to drive the oscilloscope to produce what are called Lissajous figures. And he did a whole series of experiments with these, and he put a camera in front of the oscilloscope and projected it up on a big screen. And more recently, in the last 5 years or so, he's been working on large-scale laser light shows. And he just did a big event up in Brisbane earlier in this year, projecting on buildings and clouds, which was something that was being done in the late 80s, I guess, when lasers were high power lasers were quite a thing. I'll just show you a few little bits of work from Robin Fox. So this is a sketch with an oscilloscope showing the Lissajous figures. So the basic idea here is that we have two sine waves. One drives the vertical deflection of the oscilloscope and the other one drives the horizontal deflection of the oscilloscope, and you get these patterns. The ABC logo is an example of a sine wave driven Lissajous figure. Here's another one. So this work was being done back at the, in the 2005, 2006, when that sort of glitchy noise-based music was very much a part of the current scene. And you can hear some of that hard-edged, no longer using sine waves in that example. And here's a more recent example of a laser show. So in all three of these examples, a max patch is being used, and in the first two, the two outputs of a stereo output sound card is being used, audio interface is being used to drive the beam deflection of the oscilloscope, and in the laser show, a multi-channel output audio interface is being used to drive the beam deflection of lasers. Let me move on. Next slide. So I guess the logical outcome of all of this stuff really is the contemporary VJ, video jockey, and this takes the concepts of sound and light and audiovisual composition, and uses contemporary video technology to accompany dance music. I'll just play you a little excerpt of this a live show that I found on YouTube. If I can just get that slide to play. So you can see the ideas of audiovisual form being realized here, and we've got live dancers, and we've got a light show, and the video material includes interestingly 3D animation, and obviously the 3D animation is synchronized to the audio signal in some way. Well, actually, it's probably synchronized to particular cues that the DJ is executing. So that's the current state of that art form in terms of popular entertainment. Interesting to see the in the video says it's a recording from a gig in Shenzhen. Interesting to see the Hong Kong flag flying there. Not sure what the political implications of that might be. Okay, so taking the idea of 3D animation and projection one step further, we have another technique called video mapping, where video is mapped onto the three-dimensional surfaces of buildings and objects. And in this little example, you can see a big three-dimensional set that was built for a live show for Eamon Tobin that he toured around the world. And the visual material is mapped onto that 3D set. So let's have a look at that. Probably haven't selected the best bit of this video, but you can go and find it. It's on the web, live at Sydney Opera House, Eamon Tobin, ISAM Live. A lot of this looks a little bit more like flat image projected on a three-dimensional surface, but there's some sections where it's much more a three-dimensional image wrapped onto a three-dimensional surface. and obviously synchronized with the music. Not exactly sure what he's doing in there, twiddling away. I mean, it must be pre-sequenced, but it gives you a sense of some of the potential for 3D mapping. So I definitely recommend you check out the rest of that video if you're interested in that technique. Okay, so moving on. So you guys have probably been seeing lots of interesting stuff that's tending towards this idea of audiovisual composition, and I thought we'd just take a few minutes. If anybody wants to open up their mic, perhaps, and mention some examples that they've seen that they think are achieving something in terms of audiovisual composition, or if you like, just pop a comment in the chat. What about you guys in the room? Have you got any good examples? Seen an amazing VJ set? No? John Hopkins, yeah, absolutely. So John Hopkins, Square Pusher is another example of an artist who does a lot of this kind of stuff, also looking to particularly using Max as a tool for synchronizing the visual display with the audio material. Okay, so I'll let you think about that. You might come up with some more examples as we keep going. So look, I want to give you a glimpse into some techniques for getting this started. So obviously the title slide that I've been using for the videos for this subject are a kind of example of audiovisual composition, and particularly using the JIT.LCD object as a tool for creating animation. Now let me just share. I'm just going to stop that share for a second and go and grab that max patch, and hopefully it's going to start up. There it is, and jump back in and share desktop with sound, share, and there, hopefully you can see the max patch there. It's a little bit teeny tiny, but I'll just get it running. Is it going to run? Probably not going to run, is it? So for record, that's not something that. Okay. Start typing text. Oh, I see. We need to get our Jitter Matrix going. So, just looking at this max patch. So this object, jit.lcd, is one of the jitter objects, and it takes commands that enable it to do drawings. And with anything that contains a jitter matrix, which I'll get into, it requires a bang to make every frame go. So we need to start by getting this metro going, and then there we go. We get some audio. Well, you probably can't hear the audio. Let me get the audio happening. Options, audio status, and let's send the audio to the Zoom audio device. Maybe turn the volume down a sneaky bit so I don't hurt you all. So you saw that that executing there. No, you didn't, because I didn't turn the audio on. And there are little plinky plonks. Each one corresponds to a little circle that's being drawn. And in the patch down here, we get what can we do in this little patch? So let's make a window. So this window here is another one of the jitter objects. It's called jit.p window, a jit patch window for displaying jitter matrices. And I can clear the contents, and I can send these paint oval messages to the jit.lcd, and they will paint little ovals. And in this patch, the painting and the synthesis happen simultaneously. So it gives you a kind of very basic idea of syncresis, of this idea of audiovisual form. So, I mean, it's an interesting question. What can we say about the spatial and, well, I should say spatial and audio, or spatial and musical relations? In this patch, they're completely arbitrary. So the size and the position of the circles seems to bear no relation at all to the pitch or the loudness, say, for example, which might be two ways of giving a sense of maybe the size of the circle represents its closeness to you. A smaller circle is something that's further back in visual space. A larger circle is something that's closer. We could have married that onto the loudness of the individual sounds, and perhaps the height, the vertical height in the image could match the pitch. But in this patch, there's been no attempt made to create that kind of very obvious marrying of the relationship. It's worth noting also that Jitter has a whole set of objects for doing 3D animation, and this is very much just two-dimensional, but we could have drawn spheres in a three-dimensional space, which would have been a much more impressive demonstration of that idea of audiovisual form. We can also work with video in Jitter. So let me just quickly show a little example of a rather messy patch that has some video in it. So in this patch, we use the object jit.movie to load in a pre-recorded video file, and we can play it back, or we can jump to a specific frame. So this message frame or frame true with a number jumps to a specific frame, and we can get the frame count, the number of frames that there are, and use that to tell a random number generator to pre-tell it what the maximum frame number is going to be, and then to move through those randomly with this object called drunk. So drunk takes what's called a random walk. It either doesn't move, or it moves this way, or it moves that way. Each time it gets a bang, it just stays where it is, or it moves on, or it moves back. And you can tell it how far to move. So I've got two of those, two separate movies, and I've got a little a sound file player here, and I'm measuring the amplitude of the audio image, and if it exceeds a certain threshold, then it sends a message to the drunk objects to tell them to step onto a new frame. And there's another little bit of logic here that says whenever the frame number of this one is divisible by 2, then switch to the other image. And is this going to work? Let's give it a little try. This start with a trigger with lots of bangs says load the movies first, get the frame count first, load the audio file, then start playing back. And let's see what happens. I turn the volume down a little bit. Okay, so it's a fairly crude example, but it, you know, one thing that you notice occasionally is points of syncresis where obviously the transitions are going to be happening on beats, and the rate of transition increases as the loudness increases, and we get some interesting points where the video marches through the frames synchronized with the beat, and that can create some interesting effects. Okay, so that was that. One other little thing to show you is that there's two video windows. There is the patch window, the JIT.P window, and then there's another one called JIT window. And this one can be sent to a projector, so you can drag it onto an extended desktop, and it takes a full screen message to put it into full screen. So that's useful if you've got a VJ setup. Okay, so moving on. I'll just give you a little bit of background about the Jitter Matrix itself. So a standard video image is made up of pixels. So a high definition image is 1920 by 1080 pixels. And that makes a kind of matrix of individual pixels. And we get a new frame in Australia, 25 frames every second. In the US, it's some fraction close to 30 frames a second, 29.97 recurring frames per second. And you also notice that you can get 60 frame digital video as well. So a color video image is made up of red, green, and blue components in each pixel that are added together. And in a Jitter matrix, it's made up of planes. So each plane contains, well, there's one plane contains the red matrix, one for the green matrix, and one for the blue matrix. And then there's a fourth plane, which is called the alpha channel, which can be used for transparency and mixing. Inside each cell of the matrix is a number from 0 to 255. So that's an 8-bit number, and that represents the brightness of the pixel. So 0 gives you black, and 255 gives you full on. And when you combine red, green, and blue, and when they're mixed together additively, you get white. And this is how we work with the Jitter matrix in Max. So let me just quickly go and find that patch. Here it is. I'll just make it a little bit bigger so we can see. So a Jitter matrix is a bit like a buffer. It's a named object. So jit.matrix, and we give it a name. I've called mine my matrix. The first argument tells how many planes there are. So we need 4 planes for digital video. Char stands for character, which is a kind of computer jargon way of saying an 8-bit number, which goes from 0 to 255. And the next 2 arguments set the size of the matrix. So this is a 5 by 5 matrix. It's got 5 cells across and 5 cells high. Remember that high definition video is 1920 by 1080. And we can use the set cell message to set each cell. So for example, I could set the red plane to its maximum value in cell 00. And if I go to cell 10, I could set the blue plane to its maximum value. So you can start to see, that was the green, or the green, not the blue. So you can see how the cells are arranged. So if I go to cell 2, column 2, row 0, and turn on the blue, it looks like that. And if I go to the next cell, and let's say set all of them to half, so 128, 128, we should get grey. So it's a mixture of all 3. And if I go onto the next cell and set them all at 255, you'll see we should get white. Here we go, and I can go to the bottom right-hand corner cell and set it white as well. So that's basically how the matrix works. So each time we get a frame of video, it contains those 4 layers of red, green, and blue information. Now, there's a whole bunch of jitter objects. If some of you have started looking at these things, but there's an easy way to get into this, and that's with the collection of ready-made subpatches called Fizzy. So I'll just show you how this works. So the Fizzy objects are contained here, and there's a whole bunch of them, and you can read through the documentation to find out more about how they work. But you basically, for a video player, you can dump in a video file and it'll play back. And there's a bunch of different objects that do video processing. So this one here, Sketcher, finds the edges, and it can draw them in black or white. Here's a delay object, which takes the previous frames and overlays them, and you can have feedback to produce some interesting effects. So here's 2 player objects and a mixer, and a little object that takes an audio signal and splits it into 4 frequency bands, and we can use the amplitude of those bands to drive the mixer. And let's just grab our fruity bits of video here and pop them in. And we can, that didn't work. Hopefully that works. There we go. And now I can open up my audio signal, and is it going to tell me it couldn't find the audio file? Open audio file. It's working. Go. There it is. Okay, so the high frequencies are controlling the level of one video channel, and the low mids are controlling the level of the other channel. So we get this audio-driven mixing going on. Okay, so that's Fizzy, and there's a whole lot of really easy-to-use objects built into the Fizzy collection. And so that's the end of my survey. I haven't shown any of the 3D stuff, and you can do all sorts of clever things with point clouds, and anybody who's done stuff with 3D animation, you'll find all the tools you need to do that kind of stuff programmatically inside Jitter. So I hope I've given you a little bit of a taste of audiovisual composition and the use of Max as a tool for developing this audiovisual art form, and just a little bit of a glimpse inside of Jitter for those of you who might be interested in pursuing this further in your creative work. And I think that's the end of our lecture, and I look forward to seeing you all in the tutorials. If you get a chance, please jump back into the survey and get the survey completed. And just check one little chat comment. That was a thanks from Lachlan. No problems, Lachlan. We'll look forward to seeing you guys in the tutorial a little bit later.